Hi guys, Olive here today to bring you my Nonfiction November 2019 wrap-up. I read more this month than I think I ever have in a single month period before, so there is absolutely no time to waste. Let's dive right into the books. I'm going to start off by talking about the books that I included on my Nonfiction November TBR. I reviewed a lot of these, so I'm only going to be talking about them briefly. First was Every Tool's a Hammer, Life is What You Make It by Adam Savage, former star of Mythbusters and self-titled maker, who preaches his philosophy on the process of physical creation in this book. It was a really interesting read because a lot of his lessons on making can also just be applied to life in general, such as needing to do something several different times before you truly master it, and not seeing those early tries as failures, but rather iterations. I read this book with my husband since we both went to a talk that Adam Savage gave here in Pittsburgh a few months back. We were both extremely inspired by that talk, and so we decided we would like to read this book together, and since we did so, we also did a video discussion about this book together. I will link that video down in the description box below if you're interested in hearing us chat about this. Next, I read So We Read On, How the Great Gatsby Came to Be and Why It Endures by Maureen Corrigan, which is, as you would expect, all about F. Scott Fitzgerald, the Great Gatsby, and about the long-lasting legacy that the book continues to have. The author of this book is a Fitzgerald scholar, and she is so incredibly passionate and knowledgeable about this topic. I love The Great Gatsby. I have since I read it in high school, but I can honestly say that reading this book made me see it in an entirely new way. And then I also read Kicks, The Great American Story of Sneakers by Nicholas Smith. This is a history of the athletic shoe, from the original stabilization of rubber to the early versions of the shoe, such as the plimsoll, to the development of the shoe that we recognize today. The author talks about the shoes in terms of sports, fashion, but also as status symbols. It's an incredibly interesting topic, but I did find it rather uneven because so much attention is paid to the so-called shoe wars of the 1990s, where these big brands were battling for preeminence by using famous sports stars as chess pieces. I talked about both So We Read On and Kicks in a dual nonfiction review video since I read both of these for the Sports Challenge, and if you're interested in hearing more about one or both of these, I will link that video down below for you. But speaking of famous sneakers, I also read The Good Neighbor, The Life and Work of Fred Rogers by Maxwell King, which is a tremendously done biography of the host of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Mr. Rogers was an incredible human being, and not only does he mean a lot to me personally, but he is so cherished here in my city because he was from this area and he filmed the show here. I wanted to prioritize reading this biography ahead of the new Tom Hanks movie that was due to come out this month. I have since gone to see that movie, and I talk about my feelings on this book and the movie in a separate video, and I will link that down below for you. But let's finally talk about a book that I haven't already reviewed. Shall we? How about Trick Mirror, Reflections on Self-Delusion by Gia Tolentino. This is a collection of essays from a writer for The New Yorker that essentially look at the way society is today. She talks about how the internet has changed from its early days up to the present with this new performative aspect it takes on with social media. She talks about her experience being on a reality TV show as a teenager. She talks in one essay about a lot of the pressures that are still put on women. She talks in another about the reality she had to face when her alma mater, the University of Virginia, had a lot of sexual assault scandals come to light. I'll start off by saying that I didn't love this book as much as a lot of other people did. I think she raises some interesting, relevant points at times, but I also think it's super appropriate that the word mirror is in the title, because essentially all she does is hold up a mirror to some of these issues. I'm not saying it's her job as an author to fix any of these things, of course not, but I was hoping she would do a little bit more than just notice them, as many other people have done before her. She even mentions in the book that she's perfectly happy to continue participating in some of these things that she clearly sees as social issues. So she's not even going to tell us what she's going to do differently so that we can follow her lead. I'm not entirely sure why it was necessary to write a book about any of this. I also ferociously disagreed with her take on trolls. She says that just like in our homes, not every dark corner can be illuminated, so it's just expected to find life thriving there. The comparison of one's living space to the internet is terrifying. The internet is no one's home, and it is so dangerous to start thinking of it in those terms. The way I saw that argument was essentially like this. Those brown recluse spiders that live in the corners of our home, we should give them weapons, because what else are we gonna do? Shine flashlights on them all day long? I don't know about this book. I originally rated it 4 stars. I've since brought it down to 3 because I think it completely lacks staying power. And I don't know, I still think that if you're going to make previously made observations, you should be bringing up something new or presenting a path forward if you're going to charge money for a book. Just saying. Moving on to non-TBR books, this is one that I was kindly sent for review by Greystone Books, one of my favorite publishers. That book is called The Making of You, The Incredible Journey from Cell to Human by Katharina Vestry. The author of this book is an embryologist and a research fellow at the University of Oslo, and in this book she talks about conception and then embryo and fetal development, all leading up to birth. But she has a little bit of a unique take on that in this book because she's talking to you as the reader, helping you understand by talking about the development of this fetus as though it were you. This is how you developed. I thought that choice made this a really personal experience. Also, the science in here is fantastic. She clearly knows what she's talking about, but she adopts enough of an informal tone in just the right places to make this not at all intimidating. It's also just a little waif of a book. It took me absolutely no time to get through this. So if you're looking for a short book here at the end of the year, or if you're interested in this topic, or you're just interested in picking up more books on the body, this is a great place to start. I could definitely see this book being tucked into baby shower gifts for bookish expectant moms and dads. And I have to say, if you're interested in reading more about the human body, I do think it's better to start with one specific aspect of it, like the previous book, as opposed to a more general approach like Bill Bryson takes in his new book, The Body. This is the popular nonfiction writer's new book that takes you on a tour of the entire human body. And if it sounds to you like that's a huge thing to take on in one single book, you would be right. Now, don't get me wrong, I did like this book, mainly because I like Bill Bryson and his sense of humor. I just didn't think this book was necessarily very effective because it tries to take on too much topic in one, not even 500-page volume. I do consider myself more of an experienced nonfiction reader because I read a ton of it and I really know my taste and what I'm looking for out of a nonfiction book. And I personally want a little bit more out of a reading experience than what feels like a guided tour through Wikipedia articles. I did do a whole review of this book if you'd like to hear more about it, if you'd like to hear more of my thoughts. I will link that video down below if you are interested. And then I finally got around to reading one of the top books of Nonfiction November last year, Educated by Tara Westover. This is a memoir of a woman who was raised by fundamentalist Mormons. I'm sure you've heard a ton about this book already. Her father was extremely suspicious of the government. He would regularly claim that different entities were under control of the Illuminati. So at some point during the author's childhood, he decided that he was no longer going to be sending his kids to public school. The first half of this book is made up of her recollections of her childhood. So how she and her siblings would work in her father's scrapyard, how they were getting hurt all the time, how her brother started to morph into this really dangerous, abusive individual, and eventually what led her to leave this situation and go off to school. While I do agree with the general consensus about this book that it is extremely well written, that she shows incredible strength throughout it, I ended up being a little bit conflicted in my feelings about it. I really wanted there to be more school stuff. Obviously, we see the end result that getting her education and leaving that environment allowed her to extricate herself from a really bad situation. But there was surprisingly little of the education itself. So an education that she's referring to in the title is much more of an abstract one. Also, it's very clear that she's still intensely angry about all of this, and she has every right to be. I would be too. But as someone who knows a little bit about removing themselves from a toxic family situation, which is all I'm going to say about that, the whole time I just wanted to yell out to her that it gets easier. You will gain more perspective as you get farther away from it, and you will be able to do yourself the favor of letting go of the anger. So I'm conflicted about the timing of this memoir because I think it's good that she wrote it so close to the situation because she's more capable of remembering things clearly. The memory does fade as you get farther away from a situation, and also you can remember what it felt like. You're able to make the reader feel like they're there with you if you're writing it closer to when it actually happened. But on the other hand, she hasn't had the time to heal and reflect. She doesn't have the perspective on the whole situation that she will likely have even 5 years from now. But it was so interesting because this month I read an entirely different memoir that I feel may have suffered from the opposite problem. That book was called Into the Planet: My Life as a Cave Diver by Jill Heinerth. This is the author's story of becoming a cave diver, or someone who does deep dives into subterraneous underwater caves and sees places deep under the earth that most of us will never get a chance to see. Because most of us lay people will never get a chance to see those caves, I do wish there was more talk in this book about the caves themselves. themselves. It was so interesting when she talked about them. But this book is much more about what the subtitle promises. Her life as a cave diver and all the excitement, but all the danger and the tragedy that goes along with it. She talks about how many of her friends and colleagues died while diving. It is extremely difficult to keep yourself safe when you're on a dive. Even one misstep with any of your equipment can mean certain death. It's also just really hard on your body. The author at one point got decompression sickness when she came up to the surface too fast, which was probably the most interesting part of the book. I've since gone on to do a ton of research on decompression sickness. She does talk about her personal life in this book, but it's more at a distance. At one point, she was married to another cave diver. Their marriage became strained, and then it dissolved entirely. And when she's writing about it, you can tell that she remembers that it was a hard time. She remembers that it was sad. But she has had so much time to heal that wound that we never really got to that personal level with her. She has since gone on to become friends with her ex again. She has remarried. So she's at peace with all of this. So between this book and Educated, it really got me wondering about when is the right time to write a memoir, because I think you need to be close enough where you still feel some of the sting and can take your readers there with you, but also where you have enough distance where you've gained perspective over the experiences that you've gone through and you can comment on that as well. I personally don't think either one of these memoirs was in that Goldilocks zone. My absolute favorite book of the month was 84 Charing Crossroad by Helene Hanff. This book was part of my new round of 5-star nonfiction predictions, and I just couldn't wait to pick it up, so I did this month, and my God, this is just the most wonderful thing. This is a collection of written correspondence between an American woman and several different people connected to a bookshop in London. Helene was having trouble finding the books that she wanted in bookstores in New York City, so instead she starts buying them from this bookshop and eventually starts to develop friendships with people who work there, with people connected to people who work there, people who she's never met. It starts in the 50s when rationing was still going on, so she sends them parcels of food, things they wouldn't be able to get their hands on otherwise, and they send her gifts in return. All the while, she's continuing to buy books from them over the years, and she gives them some serious sass in her letters. It's just the most perfect thing. It is so cozy, it is heartwarming and heartbreaking at the exact same time. If you are a book lover, you need to read this. It is a new favorite of mine, no question. And before you ask, yes, I have gone on to see the movie. I ordered a copy from the library and watched it the night that hold came in, and that was incredible as well. I just love this so much. The next two books I'm going to keep my discussions on extremely brief because, to be completely honest, I'm finding it difficult to figure out how to talk about them. Those books are Silent Spring by Rachel Carson and a biography of hers called On a Farther Shore by William Souter. Silent Spring was an explosive piece of nonfiction when it was published in the early 60s. The entire thing is a thorough examination of the impact that chemical pesticides, namely DDT, have on the larger environment. In this book, Carson argues in no uncertain terms that these chemical pesticides were touching every single part of nature. Nature is entirely connected. There is no part of nature that exists in isolation. She basically says in this book that to continue going as we were going, to continue using these pesticides where and in the quantities that we were, would basically be a death sentence for nature as we know it. And then William Souter's biography of Rachel Carson talks about her early life here in the Pittsburgh area, talks about how she became a scientist, how she struggled to be taken seriously as a woman in her field. And then it also talks about her determination to get her books out there in the world. And yes, I said books, plural. Silent Spring was only one of her books. I'm finding it hard to come to any definitive conclusion about how best to talk about Silent Spring because Rachel Carson was so incredibly important in basically launching the environmental movement. Publishing this book was a watershed moment in increasing public awareness of these kinds of issues. Her grander messages in this book are definitely still valid, still very important to read about, talking about how everything in nature is connected and how we as humans need to be really cautious about what we're putting out there into nature. But since the book did its job and DDT is no longer being used, it's not really necessary to read about the impacts of those specific chemicals. So while I certainly don't regret reading this book, and I'm really happy that I know more about her now, I don't know that I would necessarily recommend you read through this book in its entirety. And then lastly, I read 3 books from the Baillie Gifford Longlist. The first of those is called The Five by Hallie Rubenhold, which is an in-depth history of the lives of the women who were murdered by Jack the Ripper. This is so thorough and so well done. I also read Furious Hours by Casey Koepp. This is the tale of a murderous preacher in the 1970s American South who was murdered himself in broad daylight in front of witnesses. And the trial of the murderer caught the interest of none other than Harper Lee, the author of To Kill a Mockingbird. This book felt like 3 different books at times, but it was definitely a page-turner. And then lastly, I read On Chapel Sands by Laura Cumming, in which the author does research on her own mother's backstory, trying to get the truth behind an incident that happened in her mother's childhood, which was an incredibly well-kept secret in a small English town. It's a little slow in the first half with all the setup, but things really start to pick up in the second half once the secrets start being revealed. The entire thing has this beautiful, smooth writing style. I go much more into depth about these 3 books in the video I did all about the Baillie Gifford shortlist. I'll link that down below if you'd like to watch to hear more about these books or see which other 3 made the shortlist. So as you can probably tell, November was an extremely busy month for me with all of my reading, with all of my video making, and with keeping Nonfiction November going. I want to take a moment to thank the people who helped me this year because this event would not have been able to be what it was without their help. Sabrina over at Steakachino helped me so much with the Twitter. She made it welcoming, she made it engaging, she kept conversation going. It has been wonderful to have her. Natalie over at Curious Reader was the one who had the idea for the 2 of us to host an Instagram challenge, and I'm so glad she brought it up because it has been so much fun. She's also just really taken the lead on it. It's something that I would not have had the resources to do alone, so I'm extremely grateful. And then also Steve Donahue agreed to make a bunch of recommendation videos for Nonfiction November since he is more knowledgeable about nonfiction than I could ever hope to be. It has been so nice to have his starter kits. So to Sabrina, Natalie, and Steve, thank you so much. I could not have done this without you. And I want to thank all of you for joining in on year 5 of Nonfiction November, whether it was your first year with us, whether you've been reading with us for years, and whether you read 1 book or 20. I'm just so happy to have your participation. I know it is such a busy time of year, and it really means a lot to me that you took time out of your schedule to join in. So again, thank you all so much. Barring any unforeseen circumstances, we will definitely be back for year 6 in 2020. Please let me know down in the comments or over on our Nonfiction November Goodreads what your favorite nonfiction read of the month was. Or if you'd like to chat about any of the books I read during the month, that can also go in the comments, but you can also find me on a variety of different places on social media, and the links to all of those profiles will be in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching, and once again, thank you so much for joining me for Nonfiction November. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!